Hello and welcome to the Engage Nation podcast. Another episode here, and this time we've got a very special guest. We have Jon Flynn, the Microsoft sports nerd. I could just leave it there, but I might just give you a little bit of opportunity to give you a bit more meat around the bones on what you actually do. So yeah, please fill us in.
Cheers, Callum. Thanks. Yeah. So first off, thanks for having me. It's great to be here. So I manage the cloud business for our professional sports business here at Microsoft. So anything cloud related, that's me. I'm the nerd.
Brilliant. Great stuff. So what's going to really frame our conversation today is the PwC Sports Outlook for 2023. That's sort of 10 takeaways, but we're going to really zero in on a couple. But it was the 10th edition of their Outlook for North America, 10 predictions on the hottest issues facing the sports industry. So this year, they turned their attention to the evolution of sponsorships, environmental sustainability, teams' efforts to expand their reach by cultivating fans across international boundaries. But we're really going to deep dive into where streaming is expanding and also sort of the globalization of sports fans. Bit of background on who was actually interviewed. They did it between September and November last year, being 2023. Online questionnaire to sports industry leaders around the world. About 500 responses from senior leaders across 43 different countries. And yeah, it's a lot of really interesting findings. But we, as I said, we're gonna lock in on a couple. I know you read it. You probably got some broader thoughts on some of the other areas too. But we'll try and keep it as focused as we can. But this is maybe just a little bit of. This is just a slice, I suppose, of what is going on, and it's a pretty small cross section of what is a growing industry. But what are your feelings on sport as a business industry for the next 5 to 10 years? Are you bullish?
Very bullish, right? I mean, if you look at just simple valuations in the US market alone, right? So I'm a little bit selfish because I deal predominantly with the US market. It's our largest market by far, right? And if you look at in terms of revenue, in terms of prospective audience, in terms of fans that you have, it's a huge market, right? And there's so many disciplines. But if you look at the valuations, there's been some selling of some teams going on and some news around potential sales of teams. Look at the valuations, how they're climbing up. You got to be bullish on this, right? I mean, no one is buying a team as a loss leader, right? That valuation keeps going up. And I think one of the things that makes us more bullish as well is that we have, I think economic uncertainty might be a little bit of a misnomer right now, right? We're going through some hard times, right? There's a recession, not recession, depending, we're teetering on the edge or something, right? And there's very little businesses out there that are recession proof. But one of the ones that comes really close to it is sports, right? People still go to games. People still tune in, whether it's on streaming or whether it's on linear. People still find the ways to buy themselves the latest jersey or whatever it may be because there's been a trade and Messi's now somewhere else, right? People still do that regardless of what's going on because it's not only just a business, right? It's also an escape. It's also something that helps people get away from daily life, right? Or get away from something that is a little bit stressful. And it's funny, I was reading the study that when times are harder, things like sports and entertainment become more critical in people's lives because it takes them away from like that daily, oh no kind of moment, right? So incredibly bullish on it, Callum.
Amazing. I think that's good music to a lot of people's ears considering what is going on at the moment. I mean, it's one of those things you read what you want, but, it's not always the reality. There's always a bit of a gap between the headlines and the reality, as we know anyway. Interesting around let's get into streaming. Let's start there. I think it's a really interesting space to talk about something that's evolving quite quickly. In the US, and a lot of the stuff we talk about is focused in there, and that's your wheelhouse. There's been Bally Sports, which affects quite a few NBA and other professional sports teams, sort of in a bit of trouble recently, and I wonder if that's a bit of a reflection on the local sports network setup that's been a staple of how US viewers have watched their sports for a long time now. What does that tell you initially, I suppose, and what's going on for everyone that hasn't heard?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of bylines in the story, right? So Bally Sports and their subsidiaries control a lot of the regional sports networks here in the US, so the RSNs, right? And we have a lot of teams in the US, and they play to local markets, which includes the location, the area where they are, right? And there's a blanket RSN network owned by Bally Sports that puts it on your local carrier that you have here. And they've hit some financial troubles and they've gone bank, or they filed for bankruptcy protection. And what that means is that those local market games don't get played on linear anymore because there's no linear left, right? Because there's no money, out they go. So from a pure sports fan perspective, it's pretty dark times because, well, how am I going to get my entertainment if I'm not at the game? How do I watch it? Right. So I think it kind of plays into streaming a little bit to sort of do some foreshadowing on that. But I think the biggest play here is that how does how does an entity like Bally Sports go belly up, right? When you've got sports on the rise, you've got people tuning into these games, you've got people going to these games, you've got people transacting on merchandising, et cetera, right? The whole ecosystem that goes along with sports. How is it possible an RSN goes belly up at this point, right? And I think you can see a lot of it from the parallels drawn with linear TV in terms of, are people paying for a HBO channel on their cable provider, or do they rather get HBO Plus as a streaming service, which also comes with this other additional content and etc.? I think you're seeing a lot of it go that way. So I know a lot of the guys over there, and they're wonderful, wonderful people, right? But I think it's a case of being sort of caught a little bit behind the eight ball as far as people how they want to consume their local sports, how they want to be in control of how they watch it. They don't want the lean back experience anymore, right? Linear television is sit down and grab your favorite drink and grab your popcorn or whatever and watch something because we're going to throw content at you and that's it. The interactivity you get is whether you decide to go to the bathroom or not, right? You have absolutely no control over the channel unless you're flicking through it, right? People are getting pretty bored with that, especially in the US market, right? Because this is, I was speaking about this to a club out on the West Coast last week, right? We live in an economy that is moving so fast in terms of content production that each fan now is also a potential content producer or have ideas about how they would like content to be produced. And they can pretty much go and find it if they're looking on Twitter or Facebook or TikTok or Mastodon, whatever it is, right? They can go find it. So then coming back to that regular sort of turn on channel XYZ and sit back and watch it kind of got old real quick. And I think they fell behind the eight ball on that one.
So what's that mean for advertising? Because I think ultimately that's a big part of the cash cow for your, as you call it, the sit back and watch. Because I know what I do when the ads come on. I jump on my phone.
Yep.
Or I will, go and get something from the fridge. What does that mean? Where's the advertising going to come from? What does that mean for them and that whole industry itself?
Yeah, it's a great question. And it comes into rights as well, right? I mean, with media rights and ad rights and all those things come into play underneath the same umbrella. But where I see from the regional sports network, right? Advertisers are savvy. They understand the eyeballs in which they reach, right? And they're not entering into long-term contracts and hoping and praying for the best, right? You're not going to have a stationer in the Northeast US put a couple of ads in there and they think they're going to increase their reams of paper sale overnight, right? Because they got 45,000 eyeballs that watching a seasonal game. That's the hope and pray is gone, right? They need instant gratification on, I have these type of eyeballs. I have this demographic. I have this age group. I'm looking at, am I portraying a male heavy audience, a female heavy audience? Is it a mix, right? Am I actually communicating to the ones that hold the purchasing power, or am I communicating the ones that have to go and ask a caretaker or a parent or a guardian for the money to convert into that? That kind of stuff didn't really exist in the linear world when you were signing these long-term sort of media advertising contracts. Today's day and age, you can activate on a sponsorship on a game. You can activate within a game on a sponsorship. You can dip in and dip out depending on how it's actually working in that moment in time, right? The demographic you wanted didn't show up. Don't activate your sponsorship for this one. Save it for the next game type of thing, right? And linear just cannot keep up with that because it's not real time enough. Because when I flick on the TV, is it me or is it me and 20 of my mates? You have absolutely no insight into that, right? If I'm doing something that is controlled either by a login or a watch party or something that I'm communicating to you this is my sphere of influence that we're watching this together. You can now cater to all of us versus I flick on the TV and I leave. Right? So you think I'm watching it, but it's actually my kids are watching it, and the completely different demographic in terms of what they want to be served as an ad. And to your point, ads come on, people leave, right? People tune out. And then advertisers, they do the smart thing. They just stop coming. And then they stop coming, revenue stops coming, and then we hit back into that sort of horrible cycle again, right? So I think one of the things that advertisers or ad carriers haven't really figured out yet is just how smart advertisers are right now. They know what they want, and they want to be able to ensure that they're getting it as the activation they paid for is happening.
Makes sense. Okay. So that's probably state of play. What's the solution here? And you just say streaming, and you just put a stamp on it and go streaming. But it's probably a little bit more nuanced there, and especially about where it's where it comes from. I suppose if I look at it, there's probably a few options, right? It could be, for example, League Pass can be locked out at certain places, and that might be talking about the international part also at times. But so it could come from the league to stream. It could come from if you're a local RSN and you want to flip into streaming. They've got all the setup, they've got the production capability, they've got it all there. They just need to flip it to sort of a more of an online offering, a more interactive one. Or ultimately, you've got Amazon purchasing, NFL games. Now, I recognise the answer might be a bit of this and a bit of that. But yeah, what do you think it might look like? And what's the sort of probably in the short term solution for this?
I don't know, Callum. I think streaming is the wrap it up in a bow and put a stamp on it. I think streaming is pretty much the answer at that point, right? But I don't think it's the entire answer, right? So if you think about content, it's the way the consumer of that content wants to have it come at them, right? Whether they want to look at it from a streaming perspective. Is that streaming on a set-top box? Is it streaming on a mobile device? Is it streaming on a web interface, on a larger computer screen, for example, right? So there's all those different aspects that come into play in that regard. But I really think that content matters in this a lot more than gets, I think, the relevant airtime at this point, right? Because we can deliver it. We can deliver it via linear. We can deliver it via streaming. We can deliver it via watch parties. There's numerous ways in which we can deliver content, but that magic word here is content. And I think you're going to figure out from how your consumers are consuming it that this is the way they prefer to do it. Let's just keep going down this path. And streaming is really it, right? Because it's what you want when you want it type of thing. Because if you look at the statistics on how many people watch a live game versus how many people go back and watch that recorded game, it drops off super dramatically, right? But everyone with old set-top boxes used to hit the DVR and go, right, I'll record that because I'm working tonight or I'm doing something else and I'll come back and watch it. Never do. But it skews the stats because it's recording on the set-top box. That means someone's watched it, right? So it goes off to the linear provider. So it's not actually the way it works. So I think the real answer is TBD. I know that's a bit of a wash in terms of how to answer that directly. Streaming is it. Streaming is the future. I don't think we've figured out exactly the all-encompassing streaming solution yet, because the problem we have, and you saw it with TV, right? You saw Disney Plus come out. You've got Hulu. You've got Netflix, and you've got to pay for each and every one of those. And then people started getting, well, I've got subscriber fatigue. Now, sports wants to get into streaming, right? And you've got things like the NBA doing phenomenal stuff in their next-gen app, right? They got League Pass, and they bundled a bunch of stuff together. So we paid for League Pass. And then you've got MLS comes in with the Apple deal, right? And it's great in year one because you can bundle it. If you pay for Apple TV, we'll throw it in there for a little bit. But at some point, you're going to have to pay for that, right? And then you've got NFL and NFL Plus coming, and that's a pay-to-play. All of a sudden, you're going to get a subscriber fatigue on sports. And then I'm going to go, okay, great. So I pay for X, but now I don't get to see all the games because some of them are blacked out based upon the market where I am. So does that mean I have to pay extra? or I just miss those games completely, or do I have to go to a pub and watch them or something like that? Then that becomes another transaction at that point. So it's still a little messy. They haven't figured it out. We all have opinions on the best way to work it. I have opinions, right? The beautiful thing is we all have one. But I think we're going to see a little bit more sprawl. It's going to be a little bit more uncomfortable for a little bit, but then we're going to see consolidation. I think you're going to see more of a network to RSN model because it's been proven it works, but you're going to see that in a streaming entity, right? So if you look at the NBA Next Gen app, for example, right, you've got the Clippers have baller vision, right? And the Hawks are coming up with this. And so there's a whole bunch of localized content providers.
John, do you want to just tell us what baller vision is?
Oh, sure. So I call it baller vision. You should actually call it Ballmer vision, right? So Steve Ballmer is he's the owner of the Clippers, right? And he's got their own OTT platform. It's essentially what it is, right? And it provides you access that no one else, that you can't get anywhere else, right? Because it's made by the team for the fans of that team. So you get to go back into the locker room. You get all this cool access, and you got to pay for it, right? So that's outside of what you're paying for a league pass perspective. But the ones that are going to get it smart is that you bundle that in with a master app, if you would. And it could be NFL, it could be NHL, it could be whoever you want, right? But those bucketing it under, I have to sign into one app. I can make one payment or a couple of payments through a single payment entity. I don't have to keep going to this app, that app. Then you're going to start seeing the consolidation, and you're going to have the Ballmer visions of the world in the NBA app, for example. And you're going to have the Nets in the NBA app, for example, right? Just making it up. But I can absolutely see a world where that happens because you're going to just see history repeat itself with the streaming wars, is that you can't go to zero from a price point perspective because then you can't produce any content, but you also can't expect every single fan to pay a premium for every single club that they like because they just won't at that point. They're going to choose and someone's going to lose, and it's usually the fan.
It just feels like the rebundling. It's just a cycle. We see. We've got a thing called Foxtel in Australia, and we've got obviously we've got the Netflix, we've got the Stan over here, we've got Hulu, all the different ones. You can pick Paramount, and now Foxtel are like, hey, we can bundle all this together in one neat little, and you're like, oh, that looks quite good. And you're like, hang on, isn't this what cable was in the first place? But it's more on demand. So we've just actually come full circle and you end up in the same place, which is hilarious.
Totally.
And so let's see, maybe sports, that'll happen as well. But I imagine that might be
I think so.
The leagues are separate though, right? And are they too separate for you to be able to bundle them together? They're in competition with each other, fierce competition. Do you think they can still bundle it? Can I get Can I get a US sports pass? I'm like, sweet. I've got on-demand NFL, MLB, NHL, NBA content at my fingertips.
Yeah, well, look, I mean, there's a lot of overlap of sports seasons here, but NFL reigns supreme. Always has, right? It's probably the most protracted. So the smallest season we have out of our sports. Then you've got baseball where there's a ton of games being played, right? And you've got basketball somewhere and NHL somewhere in the middle. Now you've got MLS into the mix. Now MLS it's the first time that through the Apple deal, it's getting a lot of ad time behind it, right? Because Apple has an outlet with all these little devices that people have, right? Their phones or Apple TVs or iPads, right? You can just push content to it if you're Apple, right? It's your closed ecosystem. So you can just push it out to there. MLS has never had that moment before. So I think you're going to see a huge spike in interest of that just logically, right? More people know about it. More people go, oh, I'll give that a whirl, right? And away they go. But I think your point about we're seeing, isn't that just cable? It is just cable again when you bundle it together, right? But the magic there, it's content. Because with cable, you had a show that you had no control over as a viewer. With streaming as a platform, I can choose camera angles. I can choose if I want to have this audio feed or that audio feed. I can choose if I want to look at three things staggered on the screen together. And I can also then start putting in the second screen experience where I can now start overlaying stats and deep analysis and these analytics on what I'm watching on the big screen per se. Or I can go and I can have a watch party and we can all get involved in a watch party, and so those things aren't available on linear, right? Or very limited. Some shows you can change camera angles and things, of course, right? But I think that producer economy that we're living in right now, and the teams and leagues that figure this out, and some of them are doing a really, really good job, is that fans are also latent content producers, right? Because people are always taking TikToks or videos, whatever, if they're at a game and they're showing off and that kind of thing. But all of those camera operators that you have, you don't pay them, right? But they're producing content that other people like them want to see because they are, maybe not an influencer in the Kardashian sense of the word, but they've got 10 people that follow them on Instagram, or they have 1,500 people that follow on TikTok, right? And then they have a repost. And so everyone wants to look for that one viral moment. That's interesting, right? But what happens if you have 1,500 okay moments? Your reach is actually far bigger than having that one viral moment. And that's what all these people that are fan in a stadium, in a venue, are to you, right? And rewarding the fan to produce content on your behalf, that's that next frontier. That's that bringing that fan into the game. So not only are you watching the game, being entertained by the product on the diamond, the court, the field, whatever it is, but now you're part of the broadcast, and you're getting celebrated for it on social media. You're getting celebrated for it from a loyalty reward perspective. That stuff isn't possible with linear. So that's why I'm really bullish on streaming as well.
Yeah, it's probably, there's a segue into this other, what sort of made me think when you sort of said rewards is, and we could go super techie here, and I don't know, I overstep my own knowledge here, but the whole blockchain and Web3 world.
Got to do Web3 first though, right?
Oh, no, that's fair enough. We were at a conference yesterday. He says, I don't care what we call it, Web3, 4, 5, whatever, let's, we're probably still talking about the same thing. But in terms of when you're sort of talking about fans being more involved, I think, is probably really what we're talking about, being part of the action, contributing to a match day experience for another fan. Then, what are the opportunities there? Because, certainly if I look at sort of that blockchain technology and having a digital identity, and the NBA doing a lot of work here, and you're certainly at the forefront of that. What are the opportunities there? Because I think that's part of this streaming emergence is going to push us here. What do you think that's going?
I think so one of the cool things, right, is NFTs are much more than just digital collectible JPEGs, right? I mean, it's the real thing, I think, where Web3 and blockchain and NFT sort of collide into a fan loyalty program is the utility that you can place underneath an NFT, right? So the more that you interact with a brand, the more your utility grows. And ultimately, your loyalty. So you have a frequent flyer program, right? And you fly more, you get upgrades, or you get into a lounge or whatever that is. When you decide that you're no longer going to travel and that's it, your loyalty program is devalued to zero. You could have put tens, hundreds of thousands of dollars into that loyalty program over the span of its life, and it's just completely devalued to zero when you decide you cannot or will not or don't want to travel anymore. Completely ridiculous, right? So why aren't you able to take that and sell it, right? Because that has an intrinsic value to it, because you've got a status, right? You've got history there. How can I then transfer that to someone who's willing to give me a couple of bucks for it? And then that person isn't starting at zero anymore. They're starting at a certain level because they paid for the privilege to do that by buying someone's loyalty program. That's what I see happening with a sports loyalty program. And much like season ticket holders pass from generation to generation to generation, so with this loyalty token, right? So this loyalty token is going to have a wealth of action and interactivity with it. And the more you interact with it, the more you can kick in a utility underneath that. And a utility may be you get access to on-field audio that no one else does, or you get access to a potential ticket pool if they make it to the playoffs, regardless of the game that you're playing. All these little special things, it's play to earn versus pay to play, right? So you're interacting with your brand, you everything that you can think of, right? From merchandise, all the stuff you normally do, but you're rewarded for every single action. But the value stays. It doesn't reset itself. And then much like you can pass on a season ticket, you can then sell your loyalty program, and the teams, the clubs, leagues, whoever, they can own the the contract that underwrites it. And then they'll get the loyalty fees. The royalty fees from that as you sell in perpetuity, right? So it lives on and on and on. So I think Web3 is a way to get more interactivity, is a way to get deeper into the understanding of how your fan interacts with your brand when they're not in your purview. I think the Australian Open did a phenomenal thing, right? They mapped out the tennis court, and each part of the tennis court was sold as a NFT. And whenever like a winning shot of the game hit your part of the court, you were awarded a prize, right? Because you owned that little piece of history here, right? Because when that ball hit that part of the court and it wasn't returned or was turned into the net or whatever it was, boom, you're a winner. That keeps you looking, right? That keeps you watching. It keeps you engaged in the game. We're going to see more of that, because sitting back and watching a game, let's be frank, it's pretty boring at this point, right? Because outside of magic moments in the game, you are not glued to the action happening in front of you, whether you're there live or you're watching it on the screen or your mobile device or with friends. You do not watch 100% of the time, right? Then you start a conversation with someone over here, or something happens and that, oh, do you remember when this has happened? Then all of a sudden, 8 minutes have gone. Well, if we're playing 50-minute quarters, 8 minutes is a long time. You've missed a lot of the game. And if you're in beautiful seats behind and you're actually at the stadium in your beautiful seats, guess what? You're on TV doing this kind of thing, right? You're not even looking at the game. So people are going, wow, everyone's over there not even watching the game, right? So I think the way that you reward interactivity has to be something new, and it has to be dynamic, and it has to be fresh. And I went a bit of a tangent on that one, but I think that we're seeing a combination of a couple of cool things happening, and we're coming together.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, it's how far do you think off that is? It's the last thing I'll ask about it, because I've got one more question on actual streaming, but how close are we to that?
I think we're a lot closer than we think, but I have this funny saying, right, that most people in sports are in a race to be second, right, because they want somebody else to do it first, and they can see it works, and they can see it's proven, and they can follow the model, right, because sports is very repeatable in terms of what works. Great, let's go do that. But I think we're closer than we see. There's so much availability from a talent perspective in sports tech today that we've just never seen before, from startup companies, from companies like big tech, like I represent, that are doing these cool, innovative things. What we're seeing now is that we've got to a point where we go, okay, we believe it's cool. I can see the value. I can see how I monetize it. I can see how I gain traction in fan engagement and et cetera. Now we've got to start gluing it all together in a cohesive and sensible manner that the fans and the consumers and net new consumers want to engage in that fashion.
So last question on streaming. So how do you think some of this, the streaming wars, if you will, impact some of the TV broadcast deals, which are enormous now in some of these leagues? Is it splintered?
Yeah, I actually think it's a bell curve, right? So because TV rights never had a competitor before, other than one channel competing against another channel, one network trying to outbid another network, right? Now you've got a different outlet in streaming, and streaming's winning, right? You've got Thursday Night Football from the NFL. Like, what? There's no games on TV on Thursday night? That's unheard of, right? It was absolutely shocking. People were up in arms. If I go to the pub on Thursday, am I not allowed to watch it there? It was crazy, right? And then the network's gone, oh, we actually lost something. We never thought that. I didn't even think you were serious about that, right? So you're going to see the upward swing of a bell curve in terms of the linear networks are offering much more money to retain that media rights deal for XYZ league, right? Be it MLB, be it NHL, be it NFL. And then you're going to get to the point where they've gone, okay, we're paying all of this money, and we're still seeing drop off in viewership to streaming or to a different platform. Then you're going to see it's going to normalize down again. But I think they're in a bit of a panic mode because, number one, it's a new enemy. They don't have a rule book on how to compete against this enemy because it just simply hasn't existed before. And it came about really quick, right? We saw all the things from streaming and cord cutting and all that stuff, but it didn't really hit sports. Then all of a sudden, boom, it was there, right? And they were like, whoa, we didn't really plan for that. So I think you're going to see them, the valuations just went completely nuts, right? But when it comes down to the next cycle, because people are doing bigger deals, but they're asking them for 10 years. They're asking them for these long terms as well. I see at the end of that term, you're going to see something very, very different, because I will hazard, and it's recorded in perpetuity now, mate, right? But is that I will hazard a guess saying at the end of that term, that network's going to look very, very different as well, right? They're going to be streaming forward versus being linear forward at that point. So you're going to see a new era of streaming deals happen. And I don't think you're going to see big 10-year streaming deals anymore. And I don't think you're going to see these exclusivity deals anymore. You're going to have multi-market deals. You're going to have omni-channel in terms of, yes, there still will be broadcast. It's a huge market, right? But there'll be streaming as well. And then there's international rights. Then there's these little local rights, and then there's rights for games, and then there's playoff games, and all these. It gets real complicated real quick. I think you're going to see that come together very differently. But right now, it's a great time to be a sports franchise that has some media rights up for sale, right? Because it is the time where you're going to get a lot of cash, because people are just fighting to keep you on linear, and streaming's fighting to get you off linear. That benefits the teams big time.
Amazing. That's great. We'll move on to the next one. And I think it does actually blend nicely. I don't think I intentionally did this, but it does blend nicely into this next point, because it is around sort of the internationalization, I'll get it right, of sports, with franchises going more global. And a lot of that does have to do with their ability to access these sports by being able to watch them online, obviously. There's a number of things going on in this realm for sure. And I think really we're talking about US sports, and ultimately it's the biggest sport market on earth, and everyone wants a little bit of it, and that goes in and that comes out as well. Let's start at a generic level. If you're a US sports team, if you were running one, a professional sports team, what would be your keys to sort of cultivating a brand that is attractive to both expats who might be in your city at the moment, but also international fans? Because we had someone recently, Jordan Colosi from the San Antonio Spurs, and he was talking about how it's difficult to keep some of the fans of international players, and they had a lot of international players in their team at one stage, to keep them as Spurs fans rather than just following the player. What might you do, and what is becoming more of the major sports leagues, they're becoming more global?
It's so I think there's an added benefit. So they've got a little shot in the arm by and I think PwC call it out as well. They do the vertical integration, right, of sports media into sort of mainstream, and I think they're getting a boost for that. If you look at Drive to Survive, you look at Wrexham, for goodness sakes, right? It's opening up what you rightly said is the largest market in terms of a sports audience and sports revenue, right? Is opening up. Who the heck heard of a Welsh team called Wrexham before Ryan Reynolds and Sean McInerney bought them? Absolutely no one. They're like, Wrexham, they thought it was a spelling mistake, right? And they've made this compelling content-driven series that people just can't get enough of in the American market, right? They think it's brilliant. People are walking around stations in Indianapolis with Wrexham scarves on. I'm like, what is happening here, right? But so I think the answer is it's content-driven. Because there is so much competition for eyeballs here, that sports without entertainment is just people kicking around or throwing around or hitting around a ball, right? It gets old real quick. If you forget that entertainment piece of it, that's when you start to get people who follow players instead of teams. When they follow a winning team, fair weather fans, right? Because there's entertainment that follows that. Now, I think what we've seen with Hollywood leaning in with the Drive to Survive, I mean, America's had the North American market, including Canada, right? They've had Formula One for a while. We've had Montreal for ages, right? We've had Austin come online and be pretty popular. But when Drive to Survive was released, boom, it took off here, right? Because people were all of a sudden entertained, right? You're in the world of NASCAR and IndyCar, right? It's difficult for F1 to break in here because it is especially against NASCAR. Now, all of a sudden, you put some content behind that from an entertainment perspective on Netflix, and people are binge watching what's happening with the Formula One guys. Like, oh my God, I didn't know that. That's amazing, right? They get a little bit of understanding there. Now we have Formula One in Miami. We have a Formula One in Las Vegas, right? All of a sudden, America is now the next big bastion of Formula One. Did that happen without Netflix? Yes, it probably would, but I don't think it's going to happen in the next 10 to 15 years. Netflix took a decade of lead time away from the market being penetrated the way that it is right now. So if you look at players such as, I was walking around in Cape Town a couple of years ago, and there were more New York Yankee hats on than there were Springbok hats on. I'm like, this is ridiculous, right? As I'm walking around in Times Square and I see what is happening here, right? But that's about the globalization of a brand. Now, ask anyone. I actually did. I asked two people in New York Yankees that, who's your favorite Yankee player? They went, I don't know anybody who plays with the Yankees, right? But that's the opposite of the problem that you have, is that the brand is huge. Don't know a soul who plays on them, right? They couldn't name Derek Jeter from Judge, right? They couldn't give you a clue on that. But they found a way to create an entertainment around a brand. Chicago Bulls was built around Jordan, right? People are wandering around in Bulls shirts and like, who's the Bulls? Like, oh, no, they're pretty cool. It's like that Jordan dude, right? Don't have a clue about the game, right? They didn't. But now all of a sudden in South Africa, you see people wanting to play baseball, right? They were in the World Classic. They did okay. And you see people, the NBA, the African market, the NBA, right? It's growing. And it's thanks to things like taking what we do in the US market and putting it on streaming, because you can watch it anywhere now, right? And taking the NFL plays games in Mexico, plays games in London, plays games in Germany. You have the NBA playing games in London, playing games in Paris, right? You're opening up a market, and it's teasing them a little bit, right? Because you've got the European NBA League, you've got the European Football League, right? But the games are very different. But everyone looks at the American markets going, whoa, that's really cool. I'd like to be able to do that. And I think giving them access makes it a little bit more interesting, but I don't think you ever get a true global team, right? There's still going to be like the American market, the European market, the Australian market, right? The sub-Saharan African market in terms of rugby teams or cricket teams or baseball teams or basketball teams. But that global reach is what's important for those local markets, right? So you're not going to get like the World 15 in rugby playing against England, right? I just don't think there's a market for that. But if you get France playing England and you get people in Australia and people in Argentina and people in America watching that game because they love the game and they now have access to it and there's entertainment built around it, that's, I think, spurs that whole international globalization of it, if you would.
Interesting, and I think some of these players, international players, being really good in the US helps. But also, I think with these games, I suppose the question is around these games that are being played. The NFL, as you said, in Germany, NBA playing in Mexico, in Paris, in London. At the end of the day, though, and this has been, I'm NBA fan, so I know the sort of things that they're trying to talk about and that sort of thing. But in those circles, they'd be like, "What if we'll get an international team?" And I'm like, "Can you actually see that?" I mean, because is this probably as far as we can go from an in-person perspective? Technology is great, it's been able to give us access, but the reality is it's still a very long way away geographically. But as simple as that.
I agree. I don't buy into the whole international team, right? The whole silly diatribe I went on earlier, right? If everyone hasn't fallen asleep yet, is that I don't think there's a big enough or a wide enough support base to support an international team. Because if you think about how we're conditioned to hate the opponent, right? Then all of a sudden, two opposing teams have same members on the. It's like an Olympic team, right? Yes, we cheer for the Olympics, right? We cheer for the U.S. Olympic basketball team, but there's no world basketball team. I just don't see it working. I don't think that there's enough cohesion among fans, right, that they can give up their rivalry to now cheer for the same team. And I think one of the byproducts of globalization, right, is you're going to see normalization of the way players are trained, the opportunities that coaches are afforded. So you're going to start seeing some parity now with talent levels from different areas of the world, right? I mean, if you look at the basketball players in Kazakhstan are very different from the basketball players in Texas because the basketball players in Texas are afforded a lot more talent pool going through their high school systems, going through college, and then potentially going up, right? It doesn't work the same way in a lot of the European countries, right? So I think that is one of the cool things that really makes the sport more accessible, is that, and now I know what they do in the US. Let's adapt it for our market, versus now I know what they do in the US. Let's do what they do. Okay, maybe, but I think if you do it with your accent and your flavor, you're going to get a lot more buy-in, right? The same ways it happens over here, though, right? Because we're starting to see rugby come into the US market. We're starting to see cricket come into the US market. We have Major League Rugby, Major League Cricket. We got the World Cup for rugby in we have two of them, right? We have 31 for the men. We have 33 for the women. But if you look at rugby in the US as a local sport, it dies at college. Now they've got the Major League Rugby teams coming in, and there's some influx of sponsorship. There's some influx of international talent coming in. So it also works the other way around, is how do I get an internationally dominant sport that is very lowbrow here in the US to the same sort of levels as it is in the international market? And it's time. It's pretty difficult.
Interesting. I was just thinking about the a whole London team going for one single team. I mean, there's only one thing better than loving your team, and it's hating another team.
Absolutely. Look, I mean, I've got nothing against anyone from New Zealand until they're playing the All Blacks, right? So
That's right. Love the Springboks, but hate the All Blacks more. That's fair enough. I can understand and so from some of these sports that really have been more sort of Commonwealth based sports, certainly cricket and rugby, right? Coming to your shores, I know I think we saw the Major League. I think it's called the Major League Cricket, but that competition coming in, it is coming into the US. They had their auction, and you got your team set up now. How do you see that playing out? I mean, cricket. I remember you talk to that many Americans about cricket, and they just sort of look at you with a blank face. They're like, baseball, but not really baseball. No, actually, it's almost impossible to explain, right? How does it get embedded? Because it's got to get quite sticky, because year one might be hard, but year two is probably going to be harder. How's that going to shape out?
Yeah, I think it might need a Wrexham moment, to be honest with you, right? To sort of amplify that and boost the time there, because it is tough. I mean, and I've tried a number of conversations to say that a game can last less than a day, 3 days, or 5 days, and there may be no winner after 5 days. People just they tune out. Like, you're just making stuff up. Just be quiet. Just stop, right? I'm like, okay. And you have to wear all white if you play more than one game, because they're like, what are you talking about, man? Right? So it is difficult. And I think in today's day and age, our attention span is limited because we have so much coming at us, right? So it's like, another sport. Is it worth my investment now to understand the rules, to understand the nuances, to get that involved that I can see, that was a foul, or that was a bad call, or that was an XYZ, right? That was an illegal move. And the answer is maybe. Right? It's a tall ask, and especially for something that I think is so insular as cricket. Now, cricket's the second most popular game in the world, thanks to the IPL, right? In terms of the amount of players that play it and the amount of revenue that they generate, just so IPL is the Indian Premier League as far as cricket is concerned, and it's huge. Right. And there's such an air of excitement going to a cricket game and watching. I was over there a couple of years ago, and I went to a cricket game. I mean, they're cheerleaders, for goodness sake. I'm like, what is happening here? This is crazy. It was loud and colorful, and it was brilliant. Right. Translating that is appealing. Translating a game that lasts 5 days where there's not going to be a winner guaranteed, or if it rains, oh my goodness. Right, the Ducks with Cotswold rules going to come in, and people can go, who duck who? What's happening? It just becomes too complicated, and I think you've lost before you started at that point, right? But I think if you can bring it down to a single entertainment point, look, we do like long games in the US because we watch baseball games that go 9 innings, right? And you try to draw the parallels between it falls apart real quick. But that time is there. They just have to figure out how to monetize it. right? And it is ripe for monetization because you have natural breaks in the game where you can put ad placements in. You have a almost a static field, right, where there is action on the edge of the field if you hit a boundary, and the boundary is the way that you score more than one. And we're not going to get into an explanation of cricket is, right? But you can place in stadium ads and all that kind of stuff. So it's there. You just got to get the American public to buy into the fact that they should like another sport, that they should bother to learn the rules and put some time into it. And I think that's your biggest problem, biggest challenge. That's why I said I think it probably needs a Wrexham moment, right?
Yeah, really interesting. And it's got, the US being just such a hotbed. It's just, we've got sports coming in. You guys trying to expand your sports out to the international waters. I mean, what so many moving parts. Really interesting though. And we're just about out of time, John. Believe it or not, went quite quickly. Bit of a summary for us. So 30 seconds on each one, mate. The future of streaming in the US. What's that going to look like in the next? I'll give you 5 years.
Yeah, I mean, it's good. We're probably out of time because I talk too much. So 30 seconds is a non-starter for me. But I think streaming is where it's at, right? I think streaming is I'm super bullish on streaming because, again, I'm a big believer in this. We are now in the content producer era, right? And the way that you get people involved deeper into your sport, into your discipline, into your game, is that you make them part of that game from a content producer standard. They're not going to be there throwing balls, not going to be there catching balls, right? But if you bring them as close to the action and you help them amplify out and you reward them for that, that's going to be super, super impactful. And I think the thing that really makes streaming sticky is that you know when and what and how I stream, and you speak to me. It's hyper personalization. You speak to me in the manner in which I engage with your team, which just isn't possible with linear.
Amazing. Yeah, cool. And then the globalization of sport, I suppose. How do you think cricket and rugby is going to go? Rugby's still got a bit of a ramp up time to figure out, what that might look like. But yeah, what's your summary on this conversation we've had around, what's heading outwards and what's coming in?
Yeah. So this is my favorite one, right? Because I'm very partial to both rugby and cricket, as luck would have it, right? But that's what I grew up with. So I'm super interested to see it coming. And look, we've got some hell of a really good talent pool for rugby in the US, but it really ends at the collegiate level. And again, that's a monetization. It's not just monetization on the sport itself to the sponsors, to the rights holders, and to the team owners. It's also, you got to pay the players, right? They got to earn a living. Right? They're going to be able to not be a banker, a plumber, a TV producer, and then do rugby on the weekends, right? Which is kind of what you have to do to make ends meet over here if you're going to be a professional rugby player. That's changed, right, with the formation of Major League Rugby. And it's a hugely fast growing sport in the United States. I think the World Cup's going to be a huge draw because it is such a great entertainment venue. Entertainment option that people haven't seen before. So it's new. It's got that new veneer to it. It's like, oh, it's cool. It's kind of like NFL, but not like NFL. So they go, Jordan, you got a lot of curiosity right there, right? So I think it's going to go gangbusters when you start bringing it onshore in this big world because there's a lot of hype behind it. All of a sudden, you're going to hear from teams and people and advertisers and sponsorship activations in your local market that you've never even heard of because it is the World Cup. And it's like, what is happening? I need to get in on that. I just then hope and pray that we can ride that wave and keep the popularity growing and get people to come see their local teams, right? Get people to go to Chicago, get people to go to Seattle, get people to come to New York and watch their local teams play, get into the pools and get into the finals, semifinals, etc. That's the thing that we have to nurture, right? I think it's that shot in the arm as a World Cup. Great. And look, we've got some cricket stuff, have some World Cup cricket games playing here as well. Again, cricket, that's my longer pole in the tent, if you would. Rugby, I think, has got a real shot in a far quicker time than cricket has this time. But I think one of the things, I'm sorry, man, 30 seconds, like 30 minutes here. I apologize for that. Is that one of the things that we're doing as well is we're making a concerted effort, the collective we, the US sort of sports, in doing a reverse globalization, right? We're trying to push our content out, trying to push our game out. And you can see it, the importance and the seriousness they put behind it, because they take last year to the NFL teams out to the European markets, down to the Mexican market as well, right? And that's a big production. That's something that they put together, and it went super good, right? It went really, really well. It was well received. It was well attended. So they'll do it again, and then they'll start growing more. And then the hopes is that you grow that local market to sustain its own version, and then so on and so forth. And I think that's the real prize there. And I'm looking forward to that happening, right? Because any sport that is a global sport is a good sport, but I don't think you can have a global team. I'm not on board with that one. I'm not signing up for that one, right? I still think we're going to have our little localization teams here, but I want everyone in the world to be able to have the thrill of playing that game.
It's a perfect person to discuss this issue as an expat in New York. So I think that's just, you got front row seats, mate. And I can't wait to have to report back to me on seeing their faces when they realize the rugby players aren't wearing any pads.
Right. And there's one team that plays the entire game.
That's right.
There's no offense and defense here. Look at run around for 80 minutes. You're crazy.
I know. Crazy. Awesome. Oh, mate, thanks so much for your time. Really, really interesting chat. Good little thanks for getting the crystal ball out, and we'll have to have you on again, John. But appreciate it. Thanks.
Thanks, mate. I look forward to it. Sorry, I waffled on a bit here as well, but I'll be, if you'll have me back, I'll wax lyrical again whenever you'll have me.
Sounds good. Thanks, mate.
Yeah, man.
We hope you enjoyed another episode of the Engage Nation podcast. If you did, we'd love it if you hit follow for us and subscribe. This thing is only going to grow. We're going to get more brilliant guests. We've got them lined up already, and the support from you would help us out a lot. And if you want to consume even more content from EngageRM, the world of sports and entertainment technology, sign up to our monthly newsletter, engagerm.com/thecrowd.